Hey, what's going on guys, and welcome back to my channel. Now in this video we'll be discussing about that how I created this whole scene including the robotish Mech, you could say, this robotish structure inside of Blender, and we'll be discussing about the both environment and the robot. So this will be divided into two parts. So this is the first part. So in the first part we'll be discussing about that how I created the Mech you can see behind me. Now after that, in the next part we will be discussing about that how we created the environment around it, including the realistic water, grass and things like that. We'll be also discussing about those cool little tricks of a camera, for example depth of field and things like that. We'll be also playing around with some orthographic value and things like that, so make sure to stick around for the whole series. So without further ado, let's jump right into the Blender window. So now coming back to the Blender window, let's discuss about that what were the steps that it took to create this kind of structure inside of Blender. Now I won't be explaining it step by step that how I created it, but I will be giving an overview of what's the tactic that I used to create hard surface shapes like these. So basically, how can I create this? How to create things like this inside of Blender? Basically what you have to do is first make blockouts. Blockouts are basically the most simplest form of structure you can make before adding the details, because without having a blockout you won't be able to imagine it in your head or see that how will the final result look like. So blockouts are really important, as blockouts can help you visualize the final result and help you add more details over on. Blockouts can be for example, in this for this project I created total 3 blockouts. First one was just very many cubes, circles and basic geometrical shapes put together, nothing very fancy going on. And in the second blockout, what I did was I added some details, and most of the details that I added were in the second blockout. And finally in the third blockout I added some very minor details, as you can see, like including the little lines you could say, which added like a very nice look to it and sci-fi look to it. Now coming back to the second tip, which is to get more and as many references and blueprints as you can. Basically, what are references and blueprints? References are basically a guidance or an image to which you can take inspiration from and create something your own using your creative mind. Now what are blueprints? Blueprints are exactly and specifically a set of drawings or a drawing which is exactly measured and their measurements written, so it can be very useful to create hard surface objects because of the measurements and everything being physically accurate. For example, I use blueprints all the time when I'm creating cars, and in fact I used it when I created this BMW car, as you can see. If you want to check out that how I created this whole scene, then make sure to check out one of my previous videos. So this is all about references and blueprints. Make sure to find as many references. For example, if you are creating a car, make sure to find as many references as you can, so you can get every idea from every look for the model that you will create. And for the robot, make sure to use websites like Pinterest to find references and blueprints. For example, for this I use Pinterest also to find out the references for it. Now last but not the least, what we have is the textures. Basically, textures play an important role, if not the most important role, inside of showcasing your models to your clients. Basically, textures can improve your model and make a bad model look great as well, and make a great model look bad. That's the power of textures. Basically, for the texture of this, it was basically for the black parts and the silver parts, you could say, or metallic parts. The blackish part was just a black color, and the silver part was just almost a grayish color, and it was set to, and its metallic value was set to a bit higher. I will give a screenshot for all of the materials on the screen. Now talking about the grunge, you could say, little dirt and rust over here and there on the model. Now I used an add-on called Grunge It. It basically makes your model look really realistic, as it adds imperfections to your model, and of course in real life everything is not perfect, so this adds an extra layer of realism to your scene. Now of course there are many different things that come into play, for example the lighting and things like that, but we'll be discussing about it in our next episode. Now what we have discussed about yet, we have discussed about blueprints, blockouts, and finally we have discussed about textures. What's next? Basically there are things called rules when you are modeling hard surface shapes. One of these rules includes 70-30 rule. Basically in the 70-30 rule, it means that 30% of your model should be filled with details, and then 70% of your model should be almost empty, if not completely empty, so that your eyes can find a place to rest while looking at the details. So that's something I did on this, and I did some high contrast details on very few parts here and there, so the viewer could see the model and see the details first, and then he can rest his eyes on the empty spots, and it makes your renders look 100 times better, trust me. Now this is a skill that takes a bit time to learn and bit of practice. And coming back to the fourth tip, which is practice and experience. Basically practice and experience make everything better. Even if you know everything, but if you haven't made anything remarkable, then you won't be able to make it unless you have some experience creating the smaller objects first and more easier objects. So just work your way up, and not just rush and say that I want to create it now. First take it slow and be patient. What you can do is start from let's say a table, or let's say a chair, things like that, and then work your way to things like these. Now we have covered everything that it took me to create this Mech, as you can see. Now in the next episode, as I've mentioned before, we will be discussing about that how to create the realistic landscape around it. So make sure to check it out later on, and then I will see you around later. See ya.